This is a basic trend screen, whether you're in BrainMaster or whether you're in NewMind, and even Thought Tech has trend screens along this line. If you use BioExplorer, and you can produce trend screens along these lines. You know, it's kind of a standardized trend screen. Even J&J had this kind of trend screen back in the 90s, and that's because we're really good at pattern recognition as human beings, and the trend screens time series analysis is an important way of looking at things in all the sciences. So certainly we have a lot of invested. We're getting some static there. I'm not sure what that's from. Let me see who's. Nope. We have a lot invested in this method of looking at things. Now there are alternatives. Looking at Z-score a lot of times. You'll just get rows of numbers that are colored, and you hope that the colors become nice. BrainMaster, for instance, has a really interesting review screen where you can see how much all of the locations move into the plus or one standard deviation or 1.5 or 2 standard deviation range. So you would be looking for all of the lines to move towards the center of the screen. In our option, you're looking for lines to move towards the bottom. Now, we're not looking at how much everything moves between 1 and 2 standard deviations because we're not just looking at Z-scores. We have a different approach. You know, with Z-score, you're trying to constrain everything within a limit. And then you try to come up with an algorithm trying to second guess the brain about how much and what things should be constrained. At NewMind, we don't assume we have that information because it's not available in the neuroimaging community, and they have more scientists and funding than we do. So I've been reading those guys for 20 years. They're very good at what they do. So we stick with the pattern, the trajectory of thinking within the field of neurofeedback by all our brilliant predecessors within the field. And that is to operantly gently push the brain in a direction that's normal using key areas and let the whole brain adjust according to its own wisdom. And for me, from a scientific perspective, that makes more sense. But, you know, as scientists, we all argue. Thatcher would argue with me, he would say, no, you want to just constrain everything into a normative range all the time. Tom Kalura would say, well, we do want to put everything into a normative range, but we don't want to constrain it all too much. So we want to develop a strategy, an opportunity to explain the rationale behind NewMind. And I'm developing a library on NMind Journal. I'm working with some developers separate from our team, another team. And we'll have a library on there which lists the research and showing which research is the basis and rationale for each thing that we're doing on NewMind. And you can go in and read the research book that we use to make our decisions on each aspect. And a lot of it's leading research in neurofeedback and neuroimaging. And we'll be putting in the most readable stuff by the best people, and that usually goes hand in hand. And so this, you know, what I'm talking about today is kind of an outgrowth. It's kind of a new strategy I'm taking to help people understand what and why we're doing what we're doing, and then give them access to read about it themselves and make their own informed decisions. But with each of these strategies, for instance, that BrainMaster and NeuroGuide take, they are very forward-thinking, very innovative, and that's a good thing. We do want people going down those you know, pushing the envelope. But the majority of us who are clinicians just want something simple, basic, and reliable that we know works, that's established, that'll get the job done. And some of us might step out into that by another program, another software, another set of amplifiers to explore that other area. And that's a well-founded tradition neurofeedback, but we all have our workhorse program and amplifiers, and NewMind seeks to be your workhorse. That's our strategy. So we're following the neurofeedback research, the 250 or more studies that have been cited consistently by Corey Hammond and other people in the field that demonstrate the efficacy of this methodology against the 3 or 4 studies that are cited for the innovative methodologies. They need more studies. So this is valid and reliable. And the asymmetry protocols are based on 30 years of research in the field of psychology and neuropsychology and neurofeedback, and well established, much better than the other methodologies. So that's why we use it. And the trend screens are the heart of what we're doing because one, human beings are very good at pattern recognition and they can see patterns in time series analysis, I believe, based on the research I've read in neuropsychology, than you can just looking at numbers. And so you will see patterns in your trend screen that are reflecting the normalization patterns in the numbers. And how do you know that? Well, if you've got a BrainMaster software, you can run a trend screen like this and see conversion, compression, and normalization and all those stages. And then you can switch over to the Z-score time and series analysis screen and see all of the variables compressing towards Z equals 0. So you can demonstrate empirically to yourself every single day with every client for as many tens of thousands of clients as we have over 15 or 20 years, that what you're seeing on our trend screen is in fact, without a doubt, and inarguably pushing the brain, not pushing the brain, but inviting the brain to move in a normative direction. And we believe that the brain prefers to move in a normative direction because it was designed to operate most efficiently there. It has a sense of survival. It wants to be there. But there have been mitigating circumstances that are preventing it from returning to its generally normative pattern. On the other hand, we don't want every brain to be in the green zone. That would be weird. That would be abnormal. Statistics normality is not the same as behavioral normality. Behavioral normality is a wide range of loosely construed mores, norms, and values that have been codified in a bizarre category form in the DSM, which is arguably not accurate at this point in history. What we want is people to be functional. Borrow a word from Martin. We want biological units to be functional that can engage in the socially preferred behavior patterns, which are group for our species. And we want them to be able to interact efficiently as a group for the good of the many, even though the good of the one, as Spock said, is not always optimal. So we're looking for an opportunity to help people's brains move into a more normative range, not into a rigid, defined, area that we call normal, but to move into a range of biological behavior, into a range of physiological activity that allows them to interact with others in their species in a productive way that allows them to access resources. And that's the whole concept behind the ISI. It was designed based upon that theoretical perspective, and it is written up in detail, authors, citations, and statistics. So everything here is integrated in the system. So what you're looking at on the trend screen is we're looking for patterns that indicate the brain is accepting an invitation to move in a normative range. If you're selecting a protocol that does not agree with the brain, then you won't see it moving. It's not accepting the invitation. Now, you can force that brain to accept the invitation. You can give it drugs, and hammer it. You can do surgery and force it to some degree. You don't know what the side effects are going to be or the long-term ramifications. There's not enough research in the planet Earth to tell you all of that, but you can force it, and that's what we've done for a long time. Biofeedback is not of that paradigm. Biofeedback is an invitation. Now, when we get into photic, we're getting into coercion again. When we get into um, uh, Tesla coils, we're getting into coercion. When we're running electrical voltages through the brain, we're getting into coercion. So on that side of the equation, I'm with Martin. But I make an exception. I say, for the purposes of assisting the client, there comes a time when brief coercion may be acceptable, but you don't want to rely on it because then it becomes a crutch and it's destructive. So best path is usually the invitation. And so we're inviting the brain to do something, and we're giving it feedback saying, this is the way home. This is the way back to your ability to thrive in your tribe. And we have three things that we're looking for here. We're looking for convergence, compression, and layering, because we know if as those move in a normative direction, we're going to see Z equals 0, the brain moving towards a normative map. Just want it to move in that direction. Any little bit of movement in that direction could be the movement that you're looking for. You know, the movement's on your shoulder, Jude. It just has to be the right movement. So we want to move that brain, and we have to work with it, not force it. And what are the criteria we're looking for? Well, for compression, we're just looking for those lines to come down into a normative range. What's normal? For adults, being between 4.5 and 12, 12.5, to have all your lines in between there is a normative range. That's a normal range. And if you're in that range, you'll see your activation generally between 2 and 3. And that's why we say we want activation between 2 and 3. That's in the normative range. We want the layering to be delta, and then theta, then alpha, and then beta if we're doing eyes open. So that's the layering we're looking for. Delta is the highest amplitude, then theta, then alpha, and beta. You know? And they can be all close together in the slow waves, but you want those slow waves apart from the fast waves. You don't want them together. And we want the symmetry, the left and the right side of the brain, to agree in their numbers. And we can see that in the beta and alpha asymmetry. So we want each of those to be 1 or greater. That's how we set up the algorithm. And that's telling you the brain is moving into a normative pattern. So if you're seeing that on the trend screen, you're seeing the brain normalized in all 5 neurometric dimensions by just watching those patterns of magnitude. So in a sense, we're using magnitude as a proxy measure of normalization in all 5 neurometric dimensions. And so we can crush all that brain map information into just looking at these patterns on the trend screen. The second advantage, which you would never get on the other graphs and patterns and methods of training, is you can see state changes, a la Barry Sturman, vigilance, withdrawal of vigilance, etc. But beyond that, you can see changes in mood. You can see changes in input from the reticular system in the brainstem. You can see changes of input from the limbic structures, septal hippocampal generators. You can see changes in cortical. And those together describe states and moods and cognitive processing that we use to interact socially as a species with our tribe.
Dr.
So,
Soutar,
yes.
could I ask a question about the state changes? For instance, when I have a client who suddenly makes a movement in the chair, and I see those numbers changing. They tend to go up, especially the high beta. I'm also seeing alpha and theta go up, and perhaps even gamma, although I haven't focused on it. Is that what's going on there? Am I looking at subharmonics and harmonics also increasing with the high beta activity? Is that a state of arousal, would you say?
It is telling you a state of arousal, but not from the brain, but by the muscles. So
And that's
when
still influencing the theta, the alpha, and the gamma.
the muscle movement primarily harmonically influences everything from high alpha up. Sometimes it can influence alpha. In terms electrically, it's influencing the lower frequencies because you're creating shifts in environmental potential, is the simplest way to put it, that are interfering with the reading of the brainwave. So delta and theta may move around in amplitude in gross patterns because the electrical environment's becoming more hostile. But when you're seeing shifts in beta, that's from muscle harmonics. So all of it's artifact when they move. But in a sense, when you see that movement, you're seeing them show a state, they're physiologically readjusting their posture. And that's usually reflecting a change in mental state too. So if you watch somebody who's doing QEG, you'll see periodic moments of alpha. In a healthy person, they'll take an alpha break every couple of seconds, depending on how much they're processing. And the whole brain will suddenly go into alpha and then move out. And we call that synchronization and desynchronization. It's so you want to see it synchronize into alpha, then desynchronize into activity, synchronize into alpha, desynchronize into activity. That is the thalamocortical loops conducting the brain symphony, telling, okay, you guys get out and play, you guys sit on the bench, you guys over there deliver sodas, you guys, take care of the people, you guys applaud. It's directing the game. And so you see the brain shifting constantly. And those are called phase transitions. That's a fancy word for it. Oh, they're going through phase transitions. And everything in nature goes through phase transitions, particularly if it's biological. So that's Martin's favorite playground. So we're looking for these phase transitions. And so when you see somebody producing artifact, they're going through a phase transition, both mental, probably psychological and physical, and they're moving in consequence. If you look at people in a QEG, every time they go into that alpha state, just before that, they start producing more beta harmonics. You'll see it in fuzzy beta lines if you're looking at the trend screen. And then you'll see more restlessness. You might see a little bit more body movement. So you'll see gross movement in delta and theta. And then all of a sudden the alpha will kick in and then it will leave and you'll see a lot of eye blinks or movement while they go through the end of that phase transition and start to recenter into a new task. And that new task may be to continue what they were thinking or move into another task. So in fact, artifacts are proxy measures of phase transitions in psychophysiology and thought, feeling, and motion. I mean, you can get that specific if you want to watch it. Does that clarify anything, Chris? Am I still being heard?
You are, Richard. Martin here.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin.
Chris is probably taking notes here.
Oh.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to take notes.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Shall I
Yeah, Mark,
feed
jump in if
in
you want. Sure.
a kind of a thought which is not so published out there in criticism?
No, let's throw some functional biology speculation for fun.
Yeah, okay. Not speculations, it's actually rational conclusions.
Okay. We call that
It's like,
speculation
oh,
scientific.
you do. Oh, you do. But then you would have to include psychology.
Well, we have to have speculation to have good hypotheses to experiment.
Exactly, exactly.
Critical component.
So, connecting to your question, Chris, in functional biology, we ask a couple of really, really heretic questions and fundamental questions, like what's the purpose of brainwaves? So that raises immediately the question, what comes first, muscle action or the brainwaves directing them? In functional biology, there is absolutely no question. It would be very hard to explain brainwaves, the phenomenon of brainwaves at all, if they wouldn't have a very serious function. So what is it? And if we come to this, we need to see that I simplify here. I could explain this over weeks, but the primary function of a central nervous system, and keep always in mind, only for convenience, we look only at the brain. We can't measure EEGs of what's going on in the spinal cord. So we see only a small picture. But back to the primary question, what's the function? Why do brains produce brainwaves? To what purpose? And from a functional biological point of view, way beyond only human brainwaves, the central nervous system function is, it is the biological CEO, in case of humans, of a community of some 45 to 50 trillion cells. So brainwaves functionally are the coordination tools for the organism. They travel in blood with the speed of light and reach every single cell simultaneously. So this function, if we consider this function, we understand that if somebody moves, their brain waves must shift. The brain wave production must shift, or they can't move. So I often have the impression that we think brainwaves is kind of a passive result of something. It's actually functionally, as it starts to emerge now, if we study this a little bit closer, the other way around. First come brainwaves and then something happens. So to come back to your question, Chris, in my opinion, yes, if somebody produces a visible motion, that must have been created by a shift toward beta. So beta isn't exclusively the passive result of muscle activity. It also requires more beta waves to produce the muscle activity. No human organism could function if any of its organs would do its thing on its own without being coordinated to all others, from the heart to the cardiovascular system to breathing rhythms and so forth. And all has to be simultaneously coordinated. And one of the tools the central nervous system needs to coordinate this is physical, brainwaves. It has other tools, slower, more general tools. So if we just look at this function, then to answer your question, yes, it would be unlikely, very unlikely, if you observe a client producing any motion, which you can observe, which is strong enough to observe, without also simultaneously seeing a previous shift, very slightly previous shift in brainwaves towards faster waves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty strong piece of speculation. It's quite a bit of support for that perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's basically applied physics. So if we look at this, but I would like to come back to the trend screen, if you don't mind, Richard. So I have a suggestion. You mentioned that, you know, we see different.
Yeah, that's why I said I would have done that too.
There is background noise.
Got it.
Did you find it?
Yep.
Okay. So the parameters, the conversion, the general trend in amplitudes and so forth, they are actually unique because on the trend screen we see a dynamic process, the client over a period of time. What I really like is Rob's way of taking screenshots of several sessions, so we can compare what happened previously. How was the conversion previously? How was the conversion 10 sessions ago?
Yep.
I really like that to kind of create a sort of an archive for your client where you take a quick screenshot from every session. And that gives you an idea over a long-term purpose. Keep in mind, what's the purpose of a trend screen at all? We try to detect success, or at least the response of the client to biofeedback.
Yeah. Oh, and that's why we have it's like a scrolling tool and grand averages, so you can scroll through the grand averages and look at them.
Yes.
And get a sense of change. But that can be that's good, but that can be deceptive too. Ultimately, we have to refer to the brain map. I see people get really confused sometimes when they're just looking at the trend screens because they're setting a goal in their mind for how it should go sometimes, like, well, I want to train theta down, and the client's not getting better if the theta is not going down as much as I expect, when in fact they're not looking at all the other lines which are rearranging themselves.
Which
And
might be a bias. It might be a bias, you know. If I only focus on theta and don't look at what's going on with the other component bands,
yes,
I might
that,
completely miss a
exactly.
dramatic progress.
And that's where we're saying just a small change in a key area could make the change we're looking for. So that's why we recommend that you watch all the frequencies, delta, theta, alpha, and beta, and that you look at the movement of those frequencies as a whole, which we do. And here I'm just beginning to explain a concept. So I'm starting with just one component band. And I do this now with everybody who's open to it, who finishes up with Jordan and Jason. They usually come to me and we go through this, but it's kind of a whirlwind tour. And sometimes you need to revisit and review and rethink a little bit of what we're doing here today. So I think those ideas, Martin, are embedded in the screen, but when you're explaining to it, I like to start with one component band, and one of the concepts, besides compression, convergence, and layering, is another pattern. You can see here that the blue is on the left and it's higher than on the right, and that shouldn't be. And that as these lines converge, they also compress. And one of the key concepts there is that whatever you do on one side affects the other side, but also whatever you do in one area affects the whole brain. You're inadvertently training the rest of the brain to some degree. So you can't think of training a location as being some kind of exclusive intervention, like, we're going into LA and we're going to stop that bank robbery right there on 24th and Vine. Um, no, it's more like somebody got shot up in a grocery store in Atlanta and it affected the whole country. So inadvertently, it's affecting the whole country, even though it's local. When you're training in one location of brain, it's going to have impact on the rest of the brain. The brain's very social. It's deeply connected.
Well, Richard, there's a point that I'd like to hear you talk about that might be interesting when you're thinking about just focusing on one, but from the whole perspective. You see trend screens where if you're looking, say, eyes opened, and you're supposed to be training, whatever protocol. So your delta should be dominant, followed by your theta, then your alpha, and so forth, the layering piece. But what you see is that even though it's a low power map, the alpha might be up in the normal range based on where it should be, but relatively speaking, it's higher than the other two brainwaves, the delta and the theta. And that might be confusing to people as well.
Well, that's a good point. That is a caveat, and that's a player who's not working with the team.
Yeah.
Right? They all should be working together, and 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 that is confusing. And that was a big question for a long time until we ran a lot more stats and saw a lot more screens. But we had to have a standardized system to see this stuff, which is what we tried to do at NewMind. I think Thatcher's trying to do the same thing too, and he's just doing it in a different way. But we're all moving in the same direction, and we'll see, which one pans out, which parts of each one panned out the best. But ours aims for simplicity because we're dealing with clinicians and not researchers and geeksters. And so you can clearly see in this trend screen that just training one frequency band, the other frequency band, and one side of the brain, the other side of the brain, that it all responds as a system. And you can see it moving from 18 microvolts, which is outside of normal range, into in between 4 and 12, and it's actually around 8, which is where 6 to 8, maybe 7, 8. That's probably where it should be for alpha. And notice we're getting this pattern here, and then we're getting this pattern where it goes below what's normal. In the old days, say, "Oh my God, we're overtraining." No, you're not. The brain is reorganizing. See, this concept of reorganization was not in neuroscience. We didn't understand it until probably after 2005, where it was really starting to become a clear picture in the neuroimaging community. This is reorganization, and part of this was the work by Pasquale Leone on compensation at Harvard. This is the brain has to move, okay, we got a new sofa in, where are we going to put it in the living room? Well, let's move the old sofa out over there, and let's bring the new sofa. And so we move the old sofa out of there. Okay, and then we bring the new sofa in, and then we arrange the old sofa. Okay, that looks better. So we have a transition phase, which is reorganization, and then we have a normalization phase where the alpha moves back into a normative range. So we have these factors working where we're inviting the brain to change key areas of symmetry and amplitude. And to do that, to accommodate the new sofa, it has to go through a transition phase, which is always difficult. And this is often the period where you see a lot of people tense up and a lot of high beta because they're integrating and their feelings are coming up, things are entering their brain, they're getting restless. They go through this transition phase, reorganization, and then normalization, reset, phase reset. And these are all phenomena in EEG. So we see that pattern, but what I tell people is this is also a general pattern. If this was instead of minute 1 to minute 30, this could be day 1 to session 1 to session 30, because overall it's like the brain and like the universe, it's holographic in nature. It's a nested system. So you see one session, you're seeing a general pattern of what the other sessions are going to look like. You break a holographic plate that's got a picture of an apple, and you've got 1,000 little apples on broken pieces. The brain is actually holographic, and it takes two-dimensional space-time and turns it into a three-dimensional holographic perceptual experience. That's the physics. And so we'll go through this transition phase, and then we see the normalization phase. And if we do that with, we jump there. If we do that and we add in another frequency, beta, and we're still only just training down the left hemisphere alpha, we're not training anything else down, you can see the whole brain as a system responds. Not only does the right hemisphere alpha go down, but the right hemisphere beta goes down. You try to look for those patterns in your numbers on Z-score, you're going to miss them. You can see them better in a trend screen. So you're seeing this pattern occur, and you can see the phase transitions better on a trend screen. I mean, it's so much more informative. So you see this pattern where the beta symmetry is normalizing and the beta is compressing and everything's going through the same phase transition, and notice beta is going up into a normalization. So the whole brain is doing that. If you're at session 1, at session 15, you're gonna see people saying, I'm getting better up to session 10 to 15. And then around session 15 in general, I'm talking in general, people start going to complaining, this not working as well, things aren't going so well, I'm having nightmares, I'm more moody and irritable, my wife or my husband's complaining. They're in phase transition. They're reorganizing their whole system at a deeper level on a more general basis. And then once they get past session 20, they start feeling much better and great and normalizing. If that doesn't happen, you're dealing with embedded complex trauma, which is going to require more deeper reorganization. You're going to have much bigger load if you're dealing with complex. The reorganization, I mean, you have to, as Rob shows photos of, the train that's gone through toxic stress or complex trauma, you can see it's a more shrunken brain. It has less myelination. It's less well organized. You're asking the brain to reorganize at an organic structural level with complex trauma more than you are if you're just dealing with psychosocial. It's more superficial trauma of ego development. So that's what you're looking for. So we get a map that looks like this. And if we try, it says try protocol 1 or try protocol 2. It gives you 2 protocols. And there's a whole story behind that. We won't go into that today. But those protocols are derived statistically. They're not derived anatomically. They're not derived through any theory. They're derived purely through statistics and electroharmonic theory, purely. The reason is because there is no neuroscience to underwrite the others. There's a lot of people claiming there is. That gets us into a lot of speculation. I'm dealing with people's lives and so forth. I want the best statistical information I can get, and then I'll make a decision. And then I'll throw in what I know anatomically. Then I'll throw in what I know from experience. Then I'll throw in what I know from intuition. I think those are important, but I got to start with where are the worst locations and what's the best harmonic solution? What's the best protocol? If delta's down, what's going to get that delta down? If beta's too high, what's going to get that down? So we have an expert system based on decades of neurofeedback research and clinical experience from our New Mind group that says these protocols tend to rectify this harmonic imbalance at these locations. Will it always? No, the complexity level is too high. We can only say probably. It's just like quantum mechanics. When the wave function collapses, we can only tell you probably what the quark relationships are going to be. We can't predict accurately. You can only give you a range of probability. So if you see where the 2 deltas are far apart, the 2 thetas are far apart, the 2 alphas are far apart, that's off. That's not how the brain's supposed to look. That's not going to show up in a normal map. You can look at it. It looks disorganized. It looks disorderly. Clean your area, soldier. Make your bed. And then we have this beta, high beta blasting all around as this person's showing all this muscle tension and beta harmonic activity because they're not comfortable in their body and they're bracing because they have complex trauma for the next shoe to drop. They're trained to live that way. So you see this beta, and where does the beta jump up? Right in the middle area of the first session where reorganization's going. And then where does the beta drop back down? Integration and normalization is happening here. You'll see the same pattern over 30 sessions. So let's go to, okay, I trained for 2 or 3 sessions, boom. That looks more organized. Soldier, that bed's got some wrinkles, looks a little better. We're learning how to pick up our messes here. So this person's ready for, last session was a little tough to get through. I'm bracing for this one, and then I'm going through reorganization phase transition. I'm starting to integrate, and then I'm getting, okay, I think it's safe here. And we're seeing the two deltas come together, the two thetas, the two alphas, the two beta. You can see a real clear difference between, oops, this and this. That's reducing noise in those neural networks. And the neural networks are homotopic, whether you read Menon, Honey, Meehan, and Bresler, I don't care who you read. And what imaging protocol they're using, it's well established at this point. So then we get to maybe, 6-8 sessions, and this is what we're seeing. Now, this is happening if we're not getting a lot of pushback from a really sick body or a really sick tribe. You're in a job or a family that is re-triggering you and abusing you, which is still fairly common in our culture. So whether you're a capitalist slave or an aristocratic slave, life is brutal at the bottom. So you move from here to here to here. Well, how much noise can you squeeze out of that system? How much order can you get? Well, look at the high beta. It's around 6. It's still going up enough around integration, but it's pretty much staying down. We have a bad moment here during normalization. Everything's not perfect. It can't be. It's too complex. The complexity levels, we just have general patterns, probability patterns, and then we see normalization. So now we know we've squeezed all the juice out of this orange. Let's go to the other protocol at the other location. Now, it may be that you just only get this far and you keep going. You're up at session 12, 13. We're still here and we keep backsliding. Well, the brain's accepting the invitation, but it's getting tripped up either by poor physical health or poor social health environment. There's another factor that could be tripping it up, and that is another network is not playing along. There's a bad player in the game, whether it's alpha that's not where it's supposed to be or delta where it's not supposed to be. There's a network upstream somewhere in the game who's just pulling the carpet under this network, and you may not get any further this. And so you go to location number 2 and bam, you're back to this. And you start training and you get to here and you go like, okay, that's looking pretty good. Okay. Then suddenly, wow, that network, we got all the way to here. Well, let me go back to the first homotopic network and look at that. And suddenly we see the worst other homotopic network is not like this, but it too is here. Okay, we nailed the bad actor who was undermining the last step that network had to take. So as I'm talking about it, I hope you're understanding that what we're doing is like a Rubik's Cube. It's a complex solution space. This is algebra 2, vector analysis, the simplified version of it I'm giving. And so the even more simple version is you're making your bed in the morning and you start out with a mess of sheets like this and you pull on one corner and you keep pulling it and you get this, but you can't get it any better. So you go, let me go to that other corner and pull on that. And that other corner looks like that and you pull that one, but you can't get any better. So, well, let me go to the third corner and pull on that. And that one's looking like that. So, well, that's not as bad as the two. Let me go and pull that. Oh, that looks good. Wow, that sheet's starting to look flatter. So you have all these vector solutions that are normalizing. And Martin knows what I'm talking about because he has to follow vectors into a good landing location.
So you're talking about like mumbly peg or
Yes,
whack-a-mole.
whack-a-mole. This is
Okay.
whack-a-mole this is great. I love you came up with that. This is
Vector analysis was going over my head till
I
got
like
it.
whack-a-mole. Yeah, no, this is network whack-a-mole, definitely. I think that's even better than making the bed, except I like the smooth sheet. You're smoothing out the rumples and the vectors. And so as we get to the top of the hour, that's what we're looking for in the trend screen. That's the full rationale of it. And we even threw a little bit of quantum physics and functional biology, thanks to Martin, and a little bit of uh, bad actors in the EEG from Rob, and then we got whack-a-mole from Michael, which was really a good way to put it.
Can I throw in what I hope a relieving thought here?
Okay.
If we keep in mind that your client's brain is the one who is playing the Rubik's Cube, not you, the therapist,
Yes.
things become a little bit easier, you know.
Good point. Very good point.
So that opens a completely different approach. But today we are not talking about this. But the different approach is very simply, if a protocol works, it doesn't harm to stay at it.
No.
It does not harm. What you're doing is you're actually enforcing, no, you're not enforcing, but you're encouraging, inviting, teasing the brain to keep the good performance up.
Yes.
And that can be very, very helpful too in many aspects you don't even look at. So you don't really need to change as soon as a brain is somewhere where you assume it should be. Just let that brain play the Rubik's Cube.
That would be Val Brown's argument. He trains only at C3, C4, and he's a firm believer in taking it from that perspective. And there's validity to it. We like to stay in a place, but through long experience and crowdsourcing and brain mapping and statistics, we've learned there is an advantage to be gained from moving and adjusting, but not always, but often. So we can't always take it as the rule, but often it is of value to move your invitations around the brain, but it doesn't always. And I can't tell you how many people are blown away by pre-post maps when they do alpha theta. And they said, I put one sensor at one location, I did 20 sessions, I remapped, and it's holy mackerel, that brain has changed into a normative direction.
See, I'm not an alpha theta religious person.
Well, that's good.
But the rationale is exactly that, Richard.
It's
why
compelling.
my take is SMR alpha theta in combination, because it works.
Mm-hmm. It's a good conservative approach, and it works. Absolutely. It does. It's the bedrock of neurofeedback going. It's where we started in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
It's very Sturman, direct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is. Okay, so that is our wrap today on protocols. If many of you have heard this from me. I never say it the same way. I'm never talking to the same group. I assume that's why. And I'm always learning and always adding to the software as I learn. And I learned a lot from you guys too. So hopefully we're learning together as a crowd here. And that's why the software takes time to come out. Rob was saying what we were doing. Well, what we were doing is we were getting the developers to sit down and shut up and just watch end users struggle with what they created. And they were jaw-dropping amazed. They were like, that's not how we meant it to be used. And we're like, yes, that's what we have to adjust. So we're going the extra mile to make sure that when you get the software, it's not like, oh my God, what have they done to my software? It's like, okay, this could work. This makes sense. And we'll be all training you ahead of time to make sure that it makes sense. And we'll allow you to retreat to your room and go back to the classic view if you're not ready to change.
Yeah, I just want to pipe in. I do appreciate your attention to the usefulness of the various screens to the clinician and then ultimately to the client, because you've got like 3 levels of attempted communication going on.
Good point, Michael. Good point. And please continue to speak up on that. We need that remembrance and input.
Like, I think most of my teenage clients might get, I don't even know if they still play Mumblety Peg. It's all That was a pretty physical.
I doubt it.
The whack-a-mole, that, I mean, you know, I don't know if well, no one goes to arcades for a
Nobody
year.
goes to archives anymore, so.
Well, but there might be home games.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. Well, there's no more loose cannons on the windjammers, but that term still has meaning. So whack-a-mole may survive. Okay, so great great concepts here, a lot to swallow, a lot to think about, but we can come back and redo this again and again, and this can be posted. Jordan's eavesdropping, and she can post it, and you can think about it. Just good for us to periodically go over it and explain the science and the purpose and the reason behind it. All right, everybody, that's a wrap for Friday.
I've just frantically tried to find the newest program for Monday and next week. Rob's email, it's on the listserv, but right now I can't tell you what's programmed. Consult the listserv for Monday.
Yep, if you can find it, you should have a special place on your computer to cherish it, right?
I need to organize this a little bit better.
All right, everybody, have a great weekend. Stay healthy. And we'll see you on Monday night at Neural Night.